I don't think I have ever been more excited, more pumped for a bracketology update as I am for this one. We are coming off of the most chaotic college basketball Saturday of all time. We had the entire top 6 go down today. We also had number 9 Texas Tech go down today. We also, earlier in the week, had number 8 Villanova go down. So just this week, we had 80% of the top 10 lose. And I hope that this is a preview of what is to come in March, where we will see a lot of upsets. And I do have another practice bracket that I will get to at the end. But the losses that these teams had this week or even today, it's not going to define the rest of their season. In fact, if I was a coach on one of the losing teams from today or this week, I would say that this is a very humbling loss. And the loss, it can be a learning experience going forward in the season with conference tournament play and March Madness. The later on the season goes, the less there is to have margin for error. Because once you get to conference tournament play, you probably could afford to play one bad game. But once you get to March Madness, let me take that back. When you're a team that's on the bubble, you can't afford to play a bad game in conference tournament play. But if you're one of the 8 teams that lost today or this week, you can afford to lose in conference tournament play, but it could affect the seeding a little bit. But once you hit the NCAA tournament, you can't afford to have a bad game, because if you have one bad game in the NCAA tournament, your season will in all likelihood come to an end. And the reason why I say likely is because sometimes we see some teams in the first round, they tend to play their first round opponent a little bit closer than what we expect them to, or it even comes in round 2, or even the Sweet 16. But the later on you get into the season, the less room there is for error. And a loss like that should be a lesson to always stay on your toes at this point in the year. And when we look at the 8 teams that lost this week, let's just call them the big 8 at this point. Let's look at who lost this week in the top 10. Gonzaga, Arizona, Auburn, Purdue, Kansas, Kentucky, Villanova, Texas Tech. It is quite possible that one of those 8 teams will possibly win the tournament. I'm not going to guarantee it, because I don't want to guarantee anything at this point, because we still have at least 1 week of regular season basketball left for a lot of these conferences. We also have some conferences starting conference tournament play next week. So there is still a lot that can happen. You never know with injuries. You never know what could happen. But it's possible that one of the 8 teams that lost today or this week could end up being the winner of this NCAA tournament. Now, I'm not guaranteeing anything. Again, there's no guarantee here. I'm just saying it is a possibility, because today or this week isn't going to define any of those teams' season. In fact, as I mentioned a moment ago, it can be a learning experience for this later portion of the season, once we get to that postseason play. So I'm now going to get to the bracketology update. So this is where I just address some of the teams that are on the bubble. And this is based off of Joe Lunardi. And also the practice bracket that I will fill out at the end. It is also based off of Joe Lunardi's current bracket. And it was last updated Friday morning. So it is going to change at least probably on Monday or Tuesday. It's going to change by the next Bracketology update. And with conference tournament play beginning, there's always the possibility of bid stealers that could take place. So it might change almost every day. But I promised at least one Bracketology video a week leading up to Selection Sunday. So let's get right into it. According to Lenardi, the last 4 byes are Rutgers, Michigan, TCU, and North Carolina. So what sticks out to me here is that with TCU's win over Texas Tech today, I think that completely pushes them out of the bubble. Kind of like what happened with Creighton. Last week, they were in that last 4 in. And then Lenardi has them way in the tournament, and he has them as a 10th seed. And I think TCU is going to have something very similar to that. I think that they're going to go completely from out of the last 4 byes to possibly a 10th seed, maybe even a 9th seed. And for Michigan, they picked up a win over Rutgers this week with the first game that Juwan Howard was suspended for his actions post-game in the Wisconsin game last week. So I think Michigan, it's possible that they could move out of that last 4 byes, but I'm not sure. I think TCU, it's possible that they will. Michigan, not quite sure. I do think, however, Rutgers is going to, with their losses this week to Michigan and to Wisconsin, I could possibly see Rutgers falling down into that last 4 in category. So I'm interested to see if Michigan and TCU both move out of that last 4 byes all the way into the tournament field. And we'll possibly maybe see someone like maybe Creighton fall out of it. I'm not quite sure. Maybe we could even see possibly really see, honestly, maybe we could see potentially a Wake Forest fall out of the tournament field into the last 4 byes. North Carolina did take care of business this week against Louisville and NC State, but I still think the Tar Heels, I think they'll stay put in the last 4 byes. Now moving on, Loyola Chicago, San Francisco, Indiana, and Memphis make up the last 4 in. And what sticks out to me here is Loyola Chicago, do they even deserve to be recognized as a team on the bubble right now? Because what have they done this season to be in this tournament? They had a big game against Northern Iowa today, and they lost that game in overtime. It was a very high-scoring game. But they don't have a resume-building win against anyone. They played Michigan State and Auburn really close. I get that. But close losses doesn't count as a morale victory to even get you a spot in this tournament field. Because if Loyola Chicago, if they don't win the Missouri Valley Conference tournament next week, they're not going to get in. Their only way to get in is to win this conference tournament. The good part about that is at least they know that they control their own destiny. The bad news is if they don't win it, they're out. The only way they get in at that point is if the tournament committee just wants to put them in just for the sake of the storyline. With what Loyola did not even 4 years ago, going all the way as an 11th seed to the Final Four. They made the Sweet 16 last season, but there's no way they want to put a team like Loyola Chicago in there. And if they don't win their conference tournament, I will be stunned if they make the field. I will be. Because they don't have that good of a resume, in my opinion. I just feel like San Francisco, who is also in this last 4, and they have a better resume than Loyola does. San Francisco has a win over BYU. They have a win over Davidson, who is currently in this tournament field. Indiana, they have been playing their way out of the tournament in these last few weeks. They do have some big resume wins, but what they've been doing lately, I think Indiana has got to step it up this week if not only they want to get out of that last four in, but to avoid being out altogether. And their upcoming schedule this upcoming week, they have got Minnesota on Sunday. That's a road game, and we've had a lot of teams struggle on the road this week, including today. They have Rutgers on Wednesday night, and that is going to be a game to circle for the bubble watch because Rutgers is currently in the last four byes, but I think that's going to change. I think Rutgers is getting knocked down to the last four in. So that could essentially be an elimination game for the bubble watch. And they go on the road against Purdue. And if they can pick up a win against Purdue next Saturday, then I think Indiana, I think they could propel themselves into the last four byes. If they can just take care of business in these final three games of the regular season and then win about maybe 2 games in the Big Ten Conference Tournament, I think Indiana is going to get in. Now, Memphis. They have signature wins over Houston, and they also have a signature win against Alabama. So they have that working for them. But they got swept by SMU. They lost to Murray State, and that loss, it is starting to look like that could end up being a difference on where they're at right now in the bubble watch. Now, for Memphis to make the tournament, it's safe to say that they have to win their conference tournament. They do have on their remaining schedule until conference tournament time, Wichita State on Sunday, South Florida on Thursday, and Houston next Sunday, March 6th. So if they can beat Houston, then I think there could be a little bit more wiggle room for Memphis. But if they don't beat Houston, I think their mission is to win this conference tournament to get in. So that was the last four in. Let's get to the first four out. The first four out consists of SMU, San Diego State, BYU, and Dayton. And what I'm failing to understand is why is SMU in the first four out when they have swept Memphis and they have a win over Houston? But SMU will have a golden opportunity to get themselves out of this first four out, at least according to Lenardi. But you never really know. Maybe, for all we know, the tournament committee might have SMU in for all we know. At least if I was on the committee, I think SMU would get in just for the simple fact that they have 2 wins against Memphis and they've won against Houston, and they have an opportunity to get another win against Houston on Sunday. So if they can beat Houston for a second time, SMU, I think, is out of this first four out conversation. San Diego State, they do have 1 win against Colorado State, but that is all that they really have at this point. Because they had chances in non-conference play to get wins over Michigan, over USC, and they failed to do so. But they have an opportunity on Monday night to get a win on the road against Wyoming, who is currently in the tournament field as a 9th seed according to Lenardi. BYU, on the other hand, let's get to them now. So let's talk about BYU. They have a win over San Diego State. They also have a win against Oregon, who is in the next four out, which I'll get to in a moment. They lost to Creighton, which that could have been a huge difference maker there. They have a win against St. Mary's, who just pulled off an upset against Gonzaga. They have a win over San Francisco, who was in that last four in. But then they lost them the second time. They got swept by Gonzaga. They lost to St. Mary's the second time. So BYU, their resume is really solid. But I still think they're not necessarily in at this point. But I think their resume lines up better than Memphis's resume, for example. And Dayton. They have wins against Miami, who is right now in 9th seed according to Lenardi. They have a win against Kansas back on November the 26th. So that is accolades for them right there. They lost to SMU, which now adding into that equation, SMU's resume, that just even further along shows that SMU's resume is pretty good for a team that is a first four out. They have a win against St. Bonaventure, who is in the next four out group. So Dayton, they've got a really good resume, I feel like. They can also pick up a big win against Davidson next Saturday. And this Atlantic 10 tournament is going to be one of the tournaments to watch, because this tournament, that conference has normally only been a one bid conference. Now it's possible that multiple teams from that conference will get in this tournament. Because usually back then it was only a one bid conference, but who knows? We could see two teams in the Atlantic 10 get in this tournament. The next four out consists of Oregon, St. Bonaventure, Virginia, and Florida. Oregon picked up a big win against UCLA earlier in the week, but unfortunately they lost to USC today, and they did beat USC earlier in the year. So they got one win against USC and a loss against USC. They do have a win against SMU from earlier in the season, who SMU is on the list of the first four out, but I feel like with their resume, they could be one of those last four in. St. Bonaventure, they're a part of that Atlantic 10 conference where we could see multiple teams from that conference get in this tournament. Virginia and Florida, I feel like with what's been going on with those two teams this week, Florida, they had an opportunity to boost their resume against Arkansas, and they lost. They do have an opportunity next Saturday against Kentucky, but they just lost to Kentucky by 21 points, not even 2.5 weeks ago. And Virginia, just like all these other three in the next four out, I feel like their tournament fate has been sealed, and the only way to get in is when they're conference tournament. So these four, the only way I think they're getting in is if they win their conference tournament. Because Oregon, they had multiple chances. They had a chance last week against Arizona to boost their resume. Lost by 3. A chance to boost their resume tonight by winning against USC. Lost by a point. So those two close losses right now has the pressure on Oregon to win the Pac-12 conference tournament. And Oregon has done it before when their backs were against the wall. And their backs are against the wall again for this season. So that is the bubble watch. And it's time to get to the practice bracket. Now I have the West region and the South region, the top half of the bracket right here. So I'm going to do one quadrant at a time. So I'm going to go through the entire West region, and then the entire South region, then the entire East region, then the entire Midwest region, and then I'll do the Final Four championship and everything like that. So first off, the winner of the play-in game between Texas Southern and New Orleans, I have Texas Southern winning that and playing Gonzaga in the 1-16 matchup. And I have Gonzaga moving on. Colorado State and Miami, I have Colorado State moving on. UConn and Iona, I have Iona because I just feel like Iona, I think that whoever is that 5th seed or the 4th seed in the in that first round matchup against Iona, I think they are an upset alert. So I have Iona moving on. Ohio State and Toledo. I have Ohio State moving on because I feel like they are a team that is on a redemption course after losing the first round last year against Oral Roberts when they had Final Four potential. USC and Davidson. I have USC moving on. Texas Tech and Texas State. I have Texas Tech moving on. Michigan State and Creighton in the 7-10 matchup. And I feel like that is that one matchup in that 7-10 that can go either way. But I feel like with Creighton losing Nemhart for the season, I think Michigan State picks up the win there. Duke and Yale, I have Duke moving on. So moving on to the round of 32, Gonzaga and Colorado State, I have Gonzaga moving on. Iona and Ohio State, I have the Buckeyes moving on to the Sweet 16. USC and Texas Tech, I have Texas Tech moving on. And Michigan State and Duke, I have Duke moving on to the Sweet 16 in Coach K's final season. Sweet 16 now, Gonzaga and Ohio State, I have Gonzaga moving on. Texas Tech and Duke, I have Duke moving on. And in the Elite Eight, Gonzaga and Duke, I have Duke advancing to the Final Four. I feel like that Gonzaga's biggest competition, the team that is stopping Gonzaga from making the Final Four, is Duke. I feel like Duke is possibly the only team. I mean, maybe Kentucky. I'd say Duke and Kentucky and potentially Baylor. I think they are the only teams that are standing in the way of Gonzaga advancing the Final Four. So if Gonzaga has to face off against one of those three teams in the Elite Eight, I think Gonzaga could be in a bit of trouble. And we saw Duke already beat Gonzaga this season, but I'd give Duke as the most likely team to give Gonzaga trouble before the Final Four. So going on to the South region now, Arizona and UNC Wilmington. I have Arizona moving on. Seton Hall and Wyoming. I have Wyoming moving on. Texas and South Dakota State. I have South Dakota State pulling off the upset. I just feel like South Dakota State is another 12 seed that could give a 5 seed some trouble because we usually see a 12 seed upset a 5 in the first round. Illinois and Chattanooga. I have Illinois winning that matchup. Iowa and North Carolina. I have Iowa moving on. Tennessee and Northern Iowa. Now, I have Northern Iowa pulling off an upset. I just feel like that there could be that occasional 14-3 upset in the first round. We don't really see it as often, but I think that could be an upset in the making. Because Northern Iowa, especially the way they played today against Loyola Chicago, they can score some points. And if it turns into a track meet, I think Tennessee is in trouble because we saw Oregon State completely dismantle Tennessee in the first round last year. So I got Northern Iowa advancing to the round of 32. Boise State and Rutgers, I have Rutgers moving on. Baylor and Long Beach State, I have Baylor moving on. On to the round of 32. I have Arizona over Wyoming. South Dakota State and Illinois. I have South Dakota State pulling off another upset and going to the Sweet 16. Iowa and Northern Iowa. I have Northern Iowa advancing to the Sweet 16 as a 14 seed. I just feel like almost every time we see Northern Iowa in this NCAA tournament, they tend to pull off at least one upset, sometimes even pull off 2 upsets. So I got Northern Iowa. Rutgers and Baylor. I have Rutgers pulling off another upset because we usually see the reigning champion go down in the second round. Recent history, we have the defending champions always out by the first weekend. Plus, we tend to have a 2 seed out by the end of the first weekend as well. Sweet 16, Arizona and South Dakota State. I have Arizona moving on to the Elite Eight. Northern Iowa and Rutgers. I have Rutgers moving on to the Elite Eight. And in the Elite Eight matchup, Arizona and Rutgers. I think Rutgers' run stops here. I have Arizona advancing to the Final Four. Moving on to the East region now. Auburn and Norfolk State, I have Auburn moving on. Xavier and Notre Dame, I have Notre Dame moving on. San Francisco and Indiana in that play-in game, I have San Francisco winning that one. And I have Houston then beating San Francisco in the 5-12 matchup. UCLA and Vermont, I have UCLA. LSU in the winner of Loyola Chicago and Memphis. I do have Loyola Chicago winning that first 4 matchup, and I also have Loyola Chicago winning this round of 64 matchup against LSU, because lately, I know I said Loyola Chicago doesn't deserve to be in the tournament right now, but every time they make the tournament, they always win at least 2 games. So I think there's the 2 games right there. Villanova and Wagner, I have Villanova moving on. Iowa State and Wake Forest, I have Iowa State. Purdue and Colgate, I have Purdue. But I feel like assuming Colgate is the AQ in their conference, I think Colgate will once again give a certain 2 seed or 3 seed a run for their money. Now, round of 32 now, Auburn and Notre Dame, I have Auburn moving on. Houston and UCLA, I have UCLA. Loyola Chicago and Villanova, I have Villanova moving on. And Iowa State and Purdue, I have Purdue moving on. Sweet 16, I have Auburn against UCLA, and I have Auburn moving on, although that does seem like a good matchup. Villanova and Purdue, I have Villanova moving on. The Elite Eight, Auburn against Villanova, I have Auburn advancing to the Final Four. Now on to the Midwest region, Kansas and Cleveland State, I have Kansas moving on. St. Mary's and Murray State, what a matchup that would be, especially with how St. Mary's did against Gonzaga tonight and how Murray State has been all season. What a matchup. I mean, this could be like one of the most hyped up 8-9 matchups ever. But I do have Murray State moving on. I really hope that we don't get that matchup in the first round, because I think both those teams, they have potential Sweet 16 potential. But I do have Murray State moving on. Alabama and North Texas, I have Alabama. Providence and New Mexico State, I have Providence. Arkansas and TCU, I have Arkansas. Wisconsin and Montana State, I have Wisconsin. Marquette and Michigan, I have Michigan, as Shaka Smart once again cannot advance past the first round since taking VCU to the Final Four. Kentucky and Jacksonville State, I've got Kentucky. Kansas and Murray State now in the round of 32, and I have Kansas. Although, with the way Murray State's been playing basketball this season, wouldn't be surprised if Murray State pulled off an upset. Alabama and Providence, I have Alabama moving on. Arkansas and Wisconsin, I have Arkansas pulling off an upset and going on to the Sweet 16. Michigan and Kentucky, I have Kentucky moving on. Sweet 16, Kansas and Alabama, I have Kansas going to the Elite Eight, and Arkansas versus Kentucky. Now, I know Arkansas beat Kentucky today, but I'm trying not to base picks off of recency bias. I think Kentucky wins against Arkansas in a Sweet 16 matchup. And in the Elite Eight, Kansas and Kentucky, we saw Kentucky dominate against Kansas earlier in the year as part of the Big 12 SEC Challenge. And I have Kentucky advancing to the Final Four. So now my Final Four is as follows. Duke, Auburn, Arizona, and Kentucky in this practice bracket. Now, Duke and Auburn, I have Duke advancing to the championship game. Arizona and Kentucky, I have Kentucky advancing the championship game. And for the championship, I have Duke against Kentucky. And winning the 2022 NCAA tournament in this practice bracket, I have the Duke Blue Devils. And once again, I picked Duke in my practice bracket. So in both practice brackets so far, I have had Duke winning the whole tournament in both of them and over Kentucky as well. So that will do it for my Bracketology update. Like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, have a wonderful day.